Thanks for joining us for this week's edition of Inside the Zone. It is week 8 already. Just 2 weeks left here in the regular season before we're talking playoffs. He's Justin Kinney from Optimum Performance Sports. And Justin, a lot of the conferences, we're really just putting the icing on the cake for some of these teams. It feels that way definitely in the SAC. Homestead's now got wins over Dwenger, over Snyder, and then last week against Carroll. They are in the driver's seat, no doubt about it. What do you see from this Homestead team this season that has allowed them to get to this point? I know we've talked a lot about them over the season, but they can put this one away this week with a home game against Wayne, which they will go in as a heavy favorite against a Wayne team that's struggled this year.
Yeah, you know, the Homestead offense is always really good each year, and I think, you know, we should praise guys like Luke Goody and Braden Hardwick and those receivers that they have, but I think the difference this year is that defense. And yeah, it hasn't looked great at times, giving up 36 to Snyder, but by and large, this is a defensive group that is performing well enough and making plays to really complement that offense. And in years past, we've had really good Homestead offenses that have also had really mediocre defenses, and they've lost a lot of 40 to 35 type games. This year, that defense is on par with making some plays, keeping teams in the teens, the 20s, and letting that offense really lead the way.
Our highlight zone game of the week is going to be Bishop Dwenger at Snyder. And when is the last time you can remember that this game did not in one way, shape, or form impact who wins the SAC's victory bell? It's like, it's basically for second place in this conference.
Yeah, it is. And I think we look at, we got Snyder and Dwenger, and then you step back, like you said, and go, this doesn't mean anything in terms of the conference standings. But it does mean a lot in that it is probably the last big test for both of these teams before they go into the postseason. So Snyder, when they're preparing for that inevitable rematch for Homestead, want to see where they're at right now, right? Bishop Dwenger, they want to see where they're at entering an unfamiliar class in 5A in the postseason. So in terms of long term, these teams really want to see the barometer game where they're at. May not mean anything for the bell, but it means a lot in terms of where these teams are just 2 weeks away from the postseason.
In diving into these teams, the one stat that jumped out to me is both of them have solid offenses. Dwenger's putting up 33 games, Snyder about 40. But defensively, Dwenger, they've played pretty much at this point the same schedule.
Yeah.
Dwenger's only given up 6.6 points a game defensively. Snyder's given up 16.6. So there's a 10-point buffer in there. And how much do you think that gives an advantage to Snyder to Homestead, to the Saints of Bishop Dwenger? Got Spartans on the brain this year.
Yeah.
Because defensively, they've been a little bit more shut down this year.
Yeah, they have, and of course those numbers are kind of skewed for Snyder with that 49-point effort that Homestead had, but you got to factor that in, of course, because Dwenger also played him. So I think it gives them an advantage because that offense maybe is not as dynamic as Snyder has, or definitely what Homestead has. So that defense needs to make some plays. It's just a typical blue-collar Dwenger team, right? I mean, we just kind of look at them, and yeah, they got some good players on offense. They got some good players on defense. Nobody wows you, but there they are, 6-1, right? Ho-hum, and a definite contender for a 5A title.
Just very good all around. Don't beat themselves. Know what they're doing. Run their schemes and run it pretty cleanly.
Yeah, I think the big thing for Dwenger offensively is, man, against a marquee defense like Snyder has, can they make some headway offensively? Because I think we've seen when they played Carroll and when they played Homestead, really had trouble moving the football consistently against those types of offenses or defenses. So they want to see maybe another barometer game in terms of that offense, see if it's clicking.
All right. For Snyder, what do you think is the biggest key in this game? Because obviously the Panthers want to get things rolling. Looking forward to. I'm sure they are hoping for a rematch against Homestead at some point. And this, like you said, might be the best barometer before they face the Spartans for a second time in the postseason.
They're going to face a tough, physical, offensive and defensive front up front. I think that's where they lost the battle, particularly on defense against Homestead offense in that battle. And I think that's not them Snyder coaches want to see, okay, where's this line at? It's not as gargantuan on the defense as we're used to seeing for Snyder, other than, you look at Giannini Belizaire, who's obviously humongous, but other those guys don't have as big a bulk as we're used to. I think Snyder has to be more technical defensively than physically overpowering that they are years past. Those linebackers look like DBs. Their corners are 5'8", 5'9". It's just not a lot of size that we're used to. So Dwenger will be a definite test for that defense to see where they're at because they have Homestead looming, even if they play like a Carroll in 6A. that could be a big game as well.
And I'll tell you, when the Snyder offense gets into the red zone, watch out for Jermaine Wells, man, at tight end.
Sure.
I walked up on the Northside game this past Friday. They were in the red zone, and I was like, oh, this is Jermaine Wells territory.
Wells time.
The next snap, Barnes, Wells, 18-yard touchdown. They hooked up twice. So watch out for Jermaine Wells, man. He can catch. All he does is catch touchdowns.
That's all he does, right? He's just put him in the red zone. You're good.
I love it. All right, Northrop at Northside also, Southside at Lures, Carroll at Concordia. Congratulations to the Redskins turned legends.
Yeah.
The totem pole resides in the hands of Mike Rivard with a 1-point win. That was a great game.
Was down 9 in the second half. They get a 31-yard field goal there early in the fourth. Then Deuce Taylor really shrugs off that sack and throws deep for a touchdown. It was the first 1-point game in totem pole history since 1981. So
Wow.
It was a great game for both teams. I think South showed a lot in terms of their competitiveness in Week 7 to come out and play for the pole. So I think it was a really good game for both teams in terms of where they're at. And having Deuce Taylor back obviously helped a lot.
Yeah, even though Southside lost, I think they feel better about what they've got going forward in the future.
Yeah, sure. And now you enter, maybe a winnable game this week, right?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, Northrop, Southside Lures, yeah.
Yeah,
Calhoun, you throw out the records. Lures has struggled. Obviously, 0 points against Dwenger, although Dwenger's defense is pretty darn good. But yeah, they made the switch, it looks like, at quarterback from what I saw. So yeah, you never know. You can catch this team sleeping too.
Sure.
And maybe overlooking them. So this could be the week for Roosevelt Norfleet and
Let's hope.
company.
We'll see.
Northeast State, East Noble in the driver's seat, especially after last week's win and the way they did it, 28-7 at Columbia City. They face a New Haven team this week that, if you discounted them at the beginning of the year, you're wrong.
Yes.
Because they've won the last 3. They've played good football. What do you see as being key in this game for a New Haven team that has won 3 straight going against an undefeated East Noble squad?
Well, getting off to a fast start, I think, is important for New Haven because you're going into Kendallville. It's always hype to go in there and play against the Knights. So if you can come out, get some plays early, key turnover, short field, maybe score a touchdown early, stay in that one, you feel pretty good. We saw what Columbia City was able to do in the first half last week at home against East Noble. It was tied at 7 at halftime. So a little different when you have to go to their place. East Noble, it's a great environment for high school football. That team is always ready to play on its home field. New Haven needs to match that intensity early on.
When you talk about East Noble, how do they grind out the second half against Columbia City? Because we've seen some games, DeKalb game, where it's a close ball game at the half, but third quarter, late third quarter, early fourth quarter is really where they start to pull away, and they did it again against Columbia City. What do you attribute that to? Because they do have some guys, and it's not like they're wearing teams out necessarily. Bailey Parker plays both ways. I mean,
Sure.
they have guys that play both ways. So it isn't a conditioning issue or a numbers issue per se. What do you think it is about East Noble that allows them to excel when the game is on the line?
I do think physically they wear down opponents as the game goes on. We talk so much about Bailey Parker and the stars of that offense, but I think just the physicality and toughness that East Noble brings over 4 quarters.
The Roughnecks.
Right? Eventually just wears teams down. And I think we saw that in the second half last week at Columbia City. East Noble felt like maybe they had a touchdown or 2 left on the table with some key turnovers, but I think it was a very business-like approach for East Noble again. Got a challenge. I think Luke Amstutz really loves these challenges because they haven't had too many of them since the NE8 season started. So having some adversity at halftime last week when you're not up 21 at the break, 28 at the break, and really have to come out and really steal a game on the road, I think was just another teaching point that Luke Amstutz is going to cherish because he hasn't had very many through the middle part of the year.
As ho-hum as this schedule kind of seems to be this week, I actually like the matchups that we have in the Northeast State because although you've got DeKalb at Belmont and DeKalb will go in as a heavy favorite, Huntington North at Norwell might be a good game there, and Columbia City at Leo. I think we really get a test to see where Columbia City is at because, as we've mentioned many times, their schedule was a little bit backloaded with the better teams in the back half. This is a good show-me game for Columbia City on the road against a team that is playoff ready, I think, in Leo.
3 straight defeats for Columbia City. They want to find some positive momentum, and Leo is just kind of that afterthought this year, right? I mean, we're talking so much about East Noble for good reason, but Leo could be that second-best team. They'll get to DeKalb next week, I think.
I believe that's right, yeah.
So that's kind of a battle for second place in the NE8 next week. So Leo seems like that forgotten team. I think Jackson Barber at quarterback starting to find his way as a sophomore. and maybe opening up some additional opportunities for Peyton Wall, whereas earlier in the year, teams were really able to stack the box against that running game.
Yeah, we saw Peyton McHale last week, 115 yards receiving. They got the Livingston kid. I mean, they have some other options if you key on Peyton Wall and try to stop him, and that's the only thing that you're doing with Jackson Barber easing into that quarterback position.
Yeah, I think earlier in the year, they couldn't make teams pay for focusing on Peyton Wall. I think they're getting to a point where they can make plays in the passing game.
The ACAC has a couple of interesting matchups this week, most notably Adams Central at Bluffton. You look out on paper, this is probably for second place or for the spot behind South Adams if everything works out like the numbers say they should. What do you see as being key in this game? Because I know it's a game that you were talking about, kind of excited to see just kind of what happens between these two teams.
I think it's a big game for Bluffton because they haven't been in this position. 6-1, how long has it been, right? So they get to play a marquee game against a solid opponent late in the year that kind of means something.
At home?
Yeah, at home. So I think they want to make a better showing than the last big-time game they had at home, right? When they invited South Adams down and lost 41-0.
It was a little nasty.
Yeah, so they want to have a better showing. And I think we're like, they're just playing out the string, who's playing for second place. It's a big deal for Bluffton in terms of program building, is if you can knock off a team the caliber of Adams Central, come into your house, finish 7-1 or 7-2, 8-1 maybe after next week. We'll see. I think it's very important for Bluffton, and Coach Kunkel wants to have his team ready, and also that momentum as you head into the postseason.
And then you've got South Adams at Woodland, also in the ACAC, which if South Adams wins, they can clinch at least a share of the ACAC title. Woodland is coming off a Saturday game where they went over and got beat 52-0 by Lima Central Catholic.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about Lima Central Catholic.
They're good.
I'm assuming they're pretty good
Yeah.
in the state of Ohio. But if you're South Adams, you've got Woodland this week, whose record isn't too bad in the conference, and then I believe it's Southern Wells left on the schedule after that. How do you make sure you're up and ready and keeping things sharp? Because you've kind of beaten, outside of Woodland, you've kind of beaten the contenders in the ACAC at this point.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. I was talking about it earlier on Saturday with somebody is Coach Grant Mosier needs to be terrified with the outside noise because it's a special season in Bern right now. And the sky's the limit. They have goals of winning a state title. And it's keeping that outside noise out of the immersiveness of a football team. And it gets very, very difficult at this part of the season. They're going to wrap up their first conference title in, 25 years, something like that. They have aspirations to get into a state championship game. But, man, he has to get his team ready to focus and play against Woodland and then against Southern Wells. And then the first week, it's a progression with that team. And as they continue to win, the noise gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's the balance that Grant Mosier needs to find. Focus on week 8, then week 9, week 10, further on, as opposed to, we got to make sure we're free on the Friday of state championship week.
The one thing that cracks me up is when I see their highlights, I see Drew Stutzman running behind the entire defense with nobody on him, the ball landing in his hands, and him going in for like a 70-yard touchdown.
Yeah.
At this point, the kid's got 27 receptions, 642 yards, 12 touchdowns. He's averaging almost 100 yards a game receiving, which is pretty amazing in high school football. Yeah. What do you do to slow them down? Because, all our highlights with Drew Stutzman are him taking it 70 yards to the house. How do you not get in front of that guy?
Because they have 3 or 4 other guys that you have to account for, right?
It's
just a team where, man, if you're on Stutzman, then Somerset's open. If you're on Somerset, then Nick Miller's open. And, all these guys are just all over the place. I think it's key to get pressure on James Arnold. Now, he's proven he can handle it.
Has he not? He's not been sacked this season.
No, he has not been. That's the big thing can they get some pressure on him and force him into some mistakes? Nobody has been able to do it this year. I think that's the key, not to beating South Adams, but at least rattling them a little bit, because we haven't seen James Arnold have to make plays with guys in his face, right? I mean, he's got legs to get out of those situations, but really we haven't seen that pass rush, play after play after play, that puts him in bad spots. I think that's a key to at least trying to slow down this offense, right? Because right now we haven't seen anything that's been able to do it.
And in the NACC, you've got West Noble at Busco. West Noble wrapped up the big division title last week, but kind of a marquee matchup, I guess you'd say, in the NECC. And also a key one, Central Noble at Eastside. I know Eastside will go in heavily favored, but a win by Eastside would wrap up the small division title outright. West Noble Busco, how much of a measuring stick can this be for West Noble? Because I know they're thinking, all right, we've got things settled for the regular season.
Sure.
We got to figure out how we can make a run in the postseason. They've got Pruitt, they've got Mayhorter, they've got Gross, they've got guys that can make plays. How do they use this game going forward as something more than just a Week 8 contest against a solid Busco team.
I think, a lot of people would say there's no more tougher team in the NECC to play than Cherubusco in terms of physicality and strength and brings it, the blue-collar attitude. So I think that's what Coach Mayorter is going to want to see on Friday night. We need to go in, we need to take care of business against a very solid, very tenacious opponent that's going to play us tough. Can we go in there and handle our business and really dominate from the outset in a volatile environment? So I think that's where you want to see if you're West Noble. They still feel they're not getting respect despite being 7-0. I think going to Cherubusco and taking care of business will be another check in the box of, hey, this team is pretty darn good.
What are you most looking forward to about Week 8? Because, as we said at the top of the show, it feels like the conference pieces have fallen mostly into place by this point. But what are you looking forward to about this week?
Some of the lower key games, the Northside-Northrop game I think is very intriguing because Northside trying to get to 500, Northrop's trying to get to 5 wins. So I think that's a storyline to watch. You have Concordia and Carroll, which I think could be a competitive game, particularly with Concordia kind of flying under the radar in terms of chances of a 3A run. Some of those next level games, I think. You mentioned the interesting game, Huntington North Norwell, I think, has a lot of intrigue on where those teams are. Norwell had a 9-0 lead at DeKalb at halftime last Friday before letting it get away. So I think some of those teams that are maybe off the radar in Week 8, those are some of the games that I want to see.
All right, we'll have them covered for you Friday night on the Highlight Zone, and then we'll talk about them next Monday here on Inside the Zone with Justin. For Justin, I'm Glenn. We'll see you next Monday.